Today we're making pizza and ciabatta from the same dough. Today we're going to figure out exactly how much of this bassonage is really necessary. Well, maybe not exactly how much, but we're certainly going to figure out if it's needing to be so excessive. We have run this test one time, the pizza test. On our first pizza test, got really nice dough, wasn't a problem for me, but I understood why the dough could get messed up at scale. You know, everybody who works in the bakery comes from is in a different position in their individual development. Some of the nuances of mixing, such as like bassonage, are not difficult to learn, but they're not necessarily the highest priority to teach somebody who's just familiarizing themselves with the mixer. And when a recipe is complicated, you know, this recipe is flour, water, and salt, and sourdough starter. That's it. Yet, it is very complicated to mix because of the amount of water that is expected to be injected at the very end of the process. So, if I can put less water in at the end, it will be easier for more people on the team at different skill levels to execute the dough well every time. If you shortchange the autolyse process here, the extra water at the end could become problematic. If you add the water too aggressively, it could become problematic. There's a wide range of error that could happen the way that the formula is currently written. So essentially I'm going to take the number that I would have put in at the end and cut it in half. So I'm going to add another 1.5 liters of water versus last week. So something very interesting happened as we were making this pizza recipe last week, and it goes to show that there's just a huge value in having someone in your bakery able to test. Dave was working on a ciabatta independently, and it just so happened that we didn't have enough sheet pans when we were making pizza, which led to Dave trying ciabatta out of our pizza dough, which I had slightly modified last week, and I'll keep my modification with the rye flour. Well, I came into work the next day, and there was this beautiful ciabatta. So we're now going to more intentionally make some ciabatta out of this pizza dough as well, because now, you know, ciabatta can be made with a slightly different formula. It's not a problem, but if you have the same dough serving two purposes really well, you know, even better. Especially for a bakery that has just a lot going on. It simplifies our life. The other benefit of the whole exercise of testing here for me in particular is that every week, just making something, I learn about what this facility needs to kind of get to the nth degree of function. You know, this is a new facility in its concept, this test kitchen for us. It's not like a copy and paste of Mesa in any way. So last week we ran the pizza test and I was missing equipment, but now we have some new tools, but I realized we're still missing scales, and so every week I'm learning some things, and hopefully the facility will get a little bit better with each passing time that we run a test as a result. It's a good use of time. here's my base 00 pizza flour. Now I really understand too, after working with this last week, its characteristics. It's very strong. I think there's a lot of reason to be confused with how flour is labeled, because the origin of all these labels might be a little bit different, and we kind of talk about different labeling systems in the same sentence. What is like type 160 or type 110 or type 85? What are all these labels? Especially in the US, our flour is somewhat poorly labeled in the stores. I was a little confused about 00 flour. I didn't realize how strong it was. I knew that it's supposed to, I think it's supposed to be milled very fine, and that's part of what makes it particularly useful in pizza and pastry applications. But I did not realize that it was so strong. The ciabatta dough that we made out of this pizza dough last week was just intensely strong, even though it's such a wet dough. So that's why it's a very, nicely suited flour for the job. It creates that open, wild crumb, which we're looking for in that bread. And it's nice in a pizza too, in the Roman pizza. That's part of the spec for the Roman pizza, is having that kind of openness. So that's the base. Now I'm moving to the balance, which is our house milled rye. That's going to be just over 5%. And this rye has a certain fragrance to it that you don't get with wheat flour. Something that comes through in final flavor too, of course. So you may think, oh, well, it's just a small amount. But that small amount of rye ends up having an outdo influence on the overall flavor of the bread, while minimally disturbing the openness of the texture provided by the 00 flour. So it's a good combination. The dough is certainly tastier than the dough that doesn't have the rye. Also gives me another use for rye on the mill, which is I'm going to be building that kind of traditional Polish bread with the rye flour. So, but I'm not going to make a lot of that. Be somewhat of a limited run. So I want to make sure to be finding good uses for rye so that it's not just sitting around. Time to start the autolyse. Go just a couple minutes in first gear. So we can scale out the rest. Okay, so here's Harriet for our pizza and our ciabatta dough. The last little bit is harder to get out accurately. Harriet's kind of the ultimate wet dough. When we first started, definitely wasn't very comfortable with handling the sourdough starter. It sort of felt like a foreign substance. Now, I don't know, it just feels like handling another dough. See, this is weird using a giant scoop for just a little bit of salt, but we don't have any smaller scoops here. That's what I mean. Everything I do in testing here, I learn something little that I need. I guess eventually you kind of end up with a database of things that you need when you open a new bakery, but we don't have those kinds of structured resources built out yet. So the big things are easy to place, the mixers, the tables, those are obvious, but then you get to the small hand tools that make everyday life better. And you realize like the way that you typically have amassed these have just been over time, like to solve problems. No different in opening a new location. You start to amass, like, I came back with a bunch of tools last week thinking, oh, got everything we need for Shay finally. Nope, like there's still random missing things. Okay, so now we have a wet autolyse as opposed to a stiff autolyse. Functionally, there's not a whole lot of difference. It's still, for an autolyse, it's still pretty strong. Like I can still grab it. It's not soup, but we've already reduced the amount of water that we have to put in addition to this in the bowl. So now we'll let this rest just like any other autolyse, and I've got this sourdough starter. I've got the salt ready to add as soon as I'm ready. So I'm probably gonna give it 20 minutes and then we'll get back at it. So we have waited. We haven't even waited that long, but look at how strong this dough already is. And this is with all of that extra water. I feel kind of guilty because it pokes a little bit of fun at the original formula, which was made by somebody I greatly respect, one of our most skilled up-and-coming bakers. So like he built a beautiful dough, just simplifying it. And it is a big deal to simplify it in the sense that we don't want somebody to require a huge amount of training to mix just one dough in a specialized way. I also generally don't want somebody to have to stand over a bowl and dribble water into the bowl for like 30 minutes. It seemed like it took forever last time to get all the water in. And it was beautiful. You know, nothing wrong with the final result, just unnecessary. And here's why. Like I can still grab this dough. I can do what I need to do with it. It's still strong. Like it's plenty strong. So now I'm gonna just keep going. And I think the final result that I'm expecting, and I mean, maybe I'm speaking too soon. Maybe this will surprise me and I'll learn something today, but my hypothesis is the dough's gonna come together almost in an identical fashion, like two identical results. Just I added a little bit more water at a different time and made my life easier. So this starter, last ingredient is a little bit of salt. And I do still have a bassinage, just much smaller. So we're gonna get this going and then I'll add the last bit of water. Strange to do this with this hand, but I have dough in my other hand. Okay, so we'll let this come together. I'll scale out the water I need. It's completely fine if I use this bucket that I had sourdough starter in. If you think about it, I scaled the exact amount of starter I needed in the dough into this bucket, and I scraped out what I could. There's a little bit left over. No harm if some of that ends up in the dough. It was meant for it anyway. Oh, I already overdid it. That's all she wrote. This is all the water that I'm adding to this dough as a bassinage. It's gonna be a lot easier. Should be roughly twice as easy. And honestly, I think I could have still pushed it. Like, I think I could have added more of this water in initially still. This is not a small amount. Dough is now all incorporated with the sourdough starter. I want to get a measure of strength now before I add water. So in order to get a greater measure of strength, I can go up into second gear. And I'm really looking at the dough on the edges of the bowl and starting to see it hopefully come away from the edges of the bowl progressively. As that's happening, I know my dough is generally getting stronger. And once that's happening pretty well, I can start thinking about adding some of this water in. There's a direct relationship between the time that you wait, the stiffness of the dough, and the starting strength at this stage. My dough is a little bit wetter because some of the water that I used to pour in after development is now here. It takes a little bit longer with that extra water to bring the dough together. My autolyse was about the same, didn't change that variable, 20-30 minutes versus the first trial that we did on this dough. So I might have a slightly extended mix time. Once I understand that mix time and realize that there's no problem with the extra time, the temperature of the dough, the strength, I can get an understanding of that range, set a timer, and walk away. Whereas if I'm holding this and dribbling it in, I'm stuck here. I can't walk away. And really, kind of the entire strategy of being a commercial baker is to start processes, be able to move to the next one, start it, be able to move to the next one and inch it forward, and you're rotating stations all day long. So the longer that I'm stuck in this one spot, the less that I can do with something else. So it's better for me to have the time with the mixer working in the background when I understand, oh, I'm gonna walk away now for 5 minutes and I'll come back, versus the idea that I have to stand over here and just dump water in the dough for 30 minutes straight. But for now, I'm trying to actually get a measure of how long does it take for it to come together. So this initial go, it more or less the same. You know, I had to watch it with the water at the end. I have to watch it now because I got to understand what it does. When I see what it does, I can see how much this flour can take a beating. I can see the temperature sensitivity. So I'm going to measure, you know, the dough temperature, see where it is in comparison to where I started my water temp. Currently 82 degrees. I'm okay with a final dough that pushes into the upper 80s because by the time it leaves this bowl, it will drop temperature and try to stabilize the room again. So still have a lot of temperature gain that we can have happen. The dough seems to be doing just fine. The elongated autolyse means it got some development without mixing, and now I can sort of use agitation to create that matrix of gluten. This dough, as I mentioned, as a double O flour, is very strong, so it can take a decent amount of mixing. So we're up to about 4 minutes of kneading. The big scheme of things, not a very long amount of time to develop a dough yet. It's longer than our country sourdough, but it's also a very wet dough. And so we need to benefit from the development of some strength. No strength in this process means we'll be dealing with more like soup when we handle it later. It's not necessarily favorable for us to handle soup. Now you can see the characteristic of the dough is now beginning to shift. More of the dough is coming up off of the edges and merging in with the mass in the center. It's just getting tighter. All right, so now that this dough has grown stronger, I'm ready for that bassonage. Again, I'm at a point where I can grab it comfortably as a whole. And so now I'm putting it back into the first gear, and I'm gonna add this water in 3 phases. It's roughly a half a liter of water per add at this point. Still a pretty hefty amount of water. And it looks like the massive dough is taking a bath. Eventually that water kind of at the perimeter just finds its way in. But the strength of the dough is somewhat preserved. The fastest way to handle this process is in a mixture of speed 1 and speed 2 in a big mixer like this. The thing is, this is a old-fashioned gear mixer, and it's not like it's not an electronic gear, it's a physical gear. So I can't switch gears without shutting down the entire machine. On an electronic gear, you can just modify the speed at will. While I way prefer this mixer to the one in Mesa that is the same size, the same style, that one does have an electronic gear shift, so you can just switch things, switch speeds without worry. In this one, you know, it's faster to go to second speed, but I have to pick the right moment to go to second speed so I don't splash things around. Just goes to show also bakers have different styles. Some bakers just have a greater tolerance for watching this thing go really fast in 3. I really haven't used Gear 3 for any bread that I've made. But you can see it's coming together a lot faster in 2. So I'm going to try to get it a little stronger again and then go to part 2 of 3, the bassinage. As it's peeling off the sides a little more, I'm growing in confidence. I get a little anxious at the higher speeds because I get the impression that the dough is getting ripped. Or at least I worry about that, whether it's happening or not. Okay, so part 2 of 3 in terms of adding water now. And as you can see, that, like at first it looks like you've ruined the dough. It looks like soup. But it comes together. And I've dropped back down to first speed again to add the water. You can add it in second, but I just tend to make more of a mess. See, it's still splashing a little bit. It's like maybe 10 seconds premature on the gear switch. Okay, so now 2/3 of the added water is in, and I'm getting close to making the decision to add the final bit. I don't want to get this wrong. I think the dough will come together either way. It's just a matter of I'm trying to get it to be completed in the smallest amount of time, making the least amount of mess. That's how I make decisions here, while keeping the highest integrity of the dough. I don't want to see the dough getting shredded. I'd like to have predictable timelines. So outside of testing, you know, in a couple iterations, I should be able to say, well, after I add the water, I'm going to go on speed 1 for X amount of minutes, then speed 2. And that allows me every time I write that down to just walk away or do something else. Spend my time a little bit differently. Okay, so here we go. Final add. Speed 1. And that'll do it. Now I just got to get the dough to a place that we're happy with. You can almost see how the dough's just like, okay, I just don't want much more water. This last bit of water is taking the longest to soak up into that base dough. But slowly but surely it's happening. And I do think I can safely shift it. It can be very satisfying to watch the dough change in form over time. Usually, there's a very strong correlation between how satisfying the dough looks in the mixer and how well you've done in developing it. A bread dough should look cohesive. It should look like it's going to be one object, not, you know, soup. If you can help it, even in a wet dough, it should have a cohesiveness to it. When you grab it, it's a one. Just kind of glancing at a watch, I can say that between active and passive development in the mixer, meaning between being able to walk away to develop this dough well probably requires about a 30-minute investment in time, like of some intentional work for 30 minutes. You can't really walk away from it during that process for more than just a few minutes of passive time. Then add kind of another 30-minute or 20, 30-minute autolyse ahead. So, by the time that you're getting the dough out of the mixer is roughly an hour after you started. Okay, so I'm just gonna give the dough a little feel. This stage. Give it a temperature check. Still in a healthy temperature range. Could still go higher. See, notice how it's not really as cohesive as could be yet. Still got a ways to go. Okay, now here's the thing. The dough develops better if you give it some more time and passive elements. Given all of that, stretching and folding is what's going to bring it to completion. I want it to be as strong as I can get it in the mixer, but stretching and folding is where it's going to truly start to feel like one cohesive dough. And that's not for a few hours that we get to see that change through the process of, pause, stretch and fold, pause, stretch and fold. At this stage, there's still an element of the dough that doesn't feel like it's gonna make great bread yet. Time, as the dough fills with gas, it becomes stronger. It's an interesting thing to watch as a baker. I don't know all the mechanisms of what caused that, but I'm getting close to the end here of this mix, even though the dough is still not as pretty as it will be when we handle it in cutting out, pizzas. And it's certainly nowhere near where it's going to be when we divide it into ciabatta. But the division into ciabatta is nearly a day away. So last week, Dave put this in speed 3 at the end. I don't even really know this gear other than for fillings and that kind of thing. So here goes nothing. It's tolerable, especially for a wet dough like this. It doesn't look like it's ripping it at all, so.
Do it.
It is now pulling off the sides more. Wow.
Yeah.
4. Wow. My mind is blown. Okay, so we are going to get one bin in for ciabatta, and the rest is going to be binned for pizza. Both doughs need folding and management through this next few hours. And then the process is easy. Just simply divide the right amount onto a tray for pizza and let it go overnight. We won't touch the pizza again until it's fully proofed and the shells are ready for baking. That's a ways away. In the meantime, we've got a few hours of basically just single actions, fold the dough. Every time we'll get an incremental improvement in the strength. And the guys at Mesa, their typical run with pizza has just been a couple hours of bulk fermentation. So really starting folds right away. And every 30 minutes for 3 or 4 folds, divide them out, make the pizzas. Ciabatta essentially followed the same routine last week, except we didn't put them on trays. So we saw that it worked well. Might as well keep that same routine. It's a good rhythm. When we resume the ciabatta, we will take it out of the bin after an overnight cold process in the bin. We'll put it on the table and we'll cut it out at that point. The pizza, as you know, make the shells, top the pies, bake them again. There you go. So one dough, two uses. Okay, there's my ciabatta dough. The rest is pizza. Pretty much got that all in one go. You saw how I was able to lift that dough as one cohesive whole, carry it over some distance. That means it's a developed dough. No other tests required. You can do that. Let's see how wet it is, though, for being developed. That's the characteristic of a high hydration dough. So is this just wheat flour, right?
This handful is actually wheat and rice mixed together.
Okay. And the handful here is just flour for the table, or?
For the table.
Yeah. So we're doing a little bit of both. We're doing some. This bin will not be all ciabatta. We're just going to make about 6 ciabatta, and the rest are going to make pizza. This ciabatta has now rested overnight in a bin. So we left it after stretching in folds, and it's nice and strong. It's cold right now, which makes it easier to work with. The ciabatta I've made in the past, I've worked with warm, which is particularly challenging. Ciabatta, like baguettes, benefits from shape-proof bake. Shape-proof bake because you then get kind of the maximum openness and airiness. If you try to retard the dough, cool it down after shaping, oftentimes by the next day, it's just not going to be as open and airy. We've gone back and forth on baguettes with this as well, where we would love to cool it down after shaping and buy ourselves some time, but every time we do, we kind of revert back to shape-proof bake as a good rhythm. So we're just going to start ciabatta on that rhythm. We had beautiful results last week, so I want to keep them there. Dave's mixing together the wheat flour and the rice flour so that we get the effect of the wheat flour in the final crust of the ciabatta, but the rice flour will prevent the dough from sticking to the couche or sticking to the board when it's transferred. What's your final scaling weight?
700.
So is it really important to overscale and then cut out?
I like that best.
Yeah.
You can lay strips on top because we're gonna pinch these 2 ends together.
Okay,
And that's all the shaping necessary.
got it. Just that? Yeah, in the past I haven't done that whole,
This would be good.
because this kind of will be almost like an ear.
Alright. Now, approximately 2 hours.
Typically a little larger in size and a little airier, a little less crusty. Like that, I don't think of a ciabatta as a very. Do you think of it as crusty bread? Yeah, yeah, not really crisp and crust, but more crumb too. So, got our ciabatta from yesterday. This has been shaped. Now it's proofed. You can see it's very delicate. You know, it's together as a whole, but just barely. So I'm gonna let Dave do the honors here. He's already gotten some practice on this oven with the ciabatta, and this is basically his ciabatta style. I'm excited because everybody has like some differences in how they do things. Dave's really good at this, so I'm excited to see how he handles it. As I say that.
Learn to work with the breeze.
Yeah, learn to work with a breeze, right? For now, I will get rid of that breeze. So these ciabattas are dusted with a combination of rice flour and standard flour. The standard flour has a really cool effect. It leaves them looking the way that they should. The rice flour's there just so that they don't stick, and so far Dave had pretty good luck with those first couple as far as the transfer. This is kind of a delicate process. You see, we're using a straight edge, flipping it over on the straight edge from the couche, then sliding it on the boards and sliding it in the oven. Actually, this is definitely gonna have that texture. You can see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the wheat flour really makes it dramatic.
Yeah. There's nothing about ciabatta that's supposed to be like perfectly square. I find it very strange that, you know, the standard ciabatta now is not ciabatta at all. Like most restaurants come and like ask for ciabatta because it's a very popular wholesale bread. It's supposed to be this free-form loaf that, you know, if you get it kind of squared, then things were in your favor, but it's not supposed to be like perfectly uniform. It's not naturally suited for wholesale bread. When you try to make it perfectly uniform, you lose the internal openness.
All right, 2 for 2.
2 for 2. Don't get that edge though. I'd give you 3 for 3 there.
All right, a little close on the last
Yeah.
one, but that's all right.
Pretty short bake ahead of us. Setting the timer for 15 minutes with some steam before we release. This space is the first time we've had makeup air. We had a hood in our garage and it came with a makeup air kit and we didn't install it. Makeup air essentially is meant to replace the air that your hood is removing from the facility. To balance the airflow in the facility, you have to also take the other HVAC in the room into consideration. So every, air conditioner in this case, with which we have 3 in the unit. The idea is by bringing replacement air in, you're helping air balance and also helping with heat removal. This is supposed to be a bit of a luxury. We find it to be a nuisance because this air is blowing right as where we're loading. So one of the problems is that we will get dust in our eyes as we're loading the bread. This one's even worse because this happens to be directly over where we're powder sugaring pastries. And so we can't do what we actually want to do on this tabletop. I'll be making some modifications over the next few weeks. We're going to be playing around with the idea of just redirecting this air so it's not blowing straight down onto a work surface, or in this case, so it's not coming straight down where we're loading the oven. So hopefully we can resolve it, and I'll have some better feedback on what to do with makeup air. Not one of the things I was prepared to deal with because I just didn't have experience in this area. Here's an example. This flour just, if you try to dust anything, so like if that was powdered sugar, that's just what happens. So we don't have any control over what happens, in these final finishing. Think about it, even putting icing on a morning bun becomes annoying because icing's blowing around. So we lose that fine-tuned control, and that's actually exactly what we need in these last stations. where we're getting product finalized, just having a little more fine-tuned control.
It's just arrived.
They look like work gloves.
I was gonna say, they look like gardening gloves to me. They did not melt when I pushed them up against the deck.
Oh, that's why you're feeling the stone?
Yeah, I was waiting to see if I could get some melt action going. But yeah, I'm not, like, I've always used these for gardening, not for, yeah, they didn't melt, so.
Seem to work okay.
I'm still a little skeptical. It's gonna take a few times of using it, I think.
Maybe that's the answer. One of the first videos I ever put out on YouTube was on oven mitts and how terrible most oven mitts are. So maybe the gardening glove style will be the winner.
Thing. Yep, went from welding to gardener. Right.
Nice rise.
Yeah,
They look bigger than last week's. Is that possible? Or about the same to you?
it's possible. I didn't scale the ones last week.
Oh, okay.
So they might actually, like, this is the first time that I've paid attention to how much they weigh.
What would you charge for that bread in 2023 prices?
Same as the country. Sourdough. Yeah.
I'm okay with it being a little bit bigger. I think it lends itself really nicely to sandwiches when it's a little heftier, a little more to play with. Easier to divide, better value. So, all right, well, we'll check on them in a little while. So these are our pizza shells proofing, and they spend a lot of time in here. From the time that we mixed the dough yesterday, the dough was binned up, folded, divided into each of these trays. And actually the pizza shells are put onto a tray of oil. So that they actually cook that in the oil. It's a bit of like almost a frying process. That's kind of what gives a particular texture to that crust, which is really nice. So at this stage, they're still pretty under fermented before we're ready to bake them. They kind of still have a bit of a stickiness. And over time, just like the pastries, when we proof them, they'll just get a little airier. And when we throw them in the oven, they should open up and yield a really nice open dough. This dough and ciabatta are so related in terms of what we're trying to get out of it. We're essentially taking the pizza side into almost like a focaccia route, whereas ciabatta is very freeform. But in a focaccia, you would dimple the dough before baking it. And that would actually decompress some of those bubbles. We find that we don't want to do that with the pizza. We want it to open up, and then we load up toppings on top, but those like open air pockets stay. And it makes for a pretty satisfying eating experience where there's some pockets, you know, in the pizza. It's definitely a very different style of pizza than most make, but I think it's really nice. Something that we can differentiate on. Something particularly well suited for our oven. Still a little light, but already fully baked, so we're just waiting for color at this point in the process. That one's probably quite sufficient in color. You see the regular flour leaves that particular like rustic appearance. Rice flour doesn't really do that. You can see it. So the country sourdough is basically just a rice flour finish, and that adds like a very smooth white texture with a nice contrast for the ornamental scoring. Whereas when you use regular flour, it leaves traces of the brown in between and kind of leaves, if you will, strands through the dough as the dough rises. So it's a different effect, and for this particular bread, it's the right effect. It's the one that we're looking for. So normally I wouldn't cut a bread right out of the oven like this, but I'm excited to see the inside of the ciabatta. what it should yield is a pretty wildly open crumb. And it'll get nicer as the loaf cools a little. But sure enough, you know, we have the wildly open crumb. It's exactly what we're looking for. And kind of going back to day one, my first ever bread that I ate as a baker was ciabatta straight out of the oven with honey on it. It's an affectionate bread for me in that regard. Immediately brings me back to that moment. In making a sandwich on it, the side profile will show just how airy it is. And of course, when the loaf's not 200 degrees, it will show nicer. But you have all those pockets, and it's a particularly nice bread for, you know, something hefty, like a muffaletta sandwich or a chicken sandwich, or because you can really load it up, and the bread holds it all together. Something saucy works really nice. I don't think there's really any other bread quite as satisfying in this way. Love a good ciabatta. Can't wait to have it regularly on our menu again. You guys see the structure of this ciabatta?
Oh, nice.
That's
Very
sexy.
nice.